Let's go over REO financials. Now, I know Josh has talked about what to do as an agent in the field and the best way to manage your expenses because there are going to be a lot. What I'm going to talk about is really, the bulk of what I'm going to talk about is when to take a loss, because sometimes you're going to have to take a loss if you really want to do the best job possible. And then also how to limit your likelihood of having your invoices rejected. Okay, that's really what we're going to go over today from my side anyway. So just some background. Outsourcers will pay the bulk of the expenses incurred on behalf of the bank, and then they're going to submit directly to the bank for reimbursement. But what you're going to find out is that just like you, they've got to follow extremely strict guidelines or else they could have their reimbursement rejected. And then a lot of times if the bank's rejecting their reimbursement, they may turn around and ask you to eat yours as well. Okay, so this excerpt was taken directly from Fannie Mae. And you can look and you can see this is for their final reimbursement. A final request for reimbursement for expenses must be submitted within 30 days after completion of a workout option, date the claim was filed. Third party acquires the property at foreclosure sale. Fannie Mae disposes of an acquired property. Okay, so what you're looking at on this is they're basically saying that you have 30 days. This is a final reconciliation from any of these events that happen. And this is put in here as an example, not to say that this is the end-all, be-all for every single outsourcer, but any outsourcer that you work with, they're going to have guidelines that say when you have to have your invoices submitted, what the cutoff date is. And I have seen some agents that send things in a year later and they're like, hey, we're doing our final reconciliation and realize we never got paid for this. Well, you're probably going to eat that because it's very clear language in your service level agreement that says, here's when you need to have your expenses submitted or else you're liable to take a loss. Okay. So I put that in there just as like a basic thing saying, look, the outsourcers are holding you to strict guidelines because they're being held to strict guidelines. Okay. If you understand that, it makes it easier for you to work with them and to manage your own finances so that you're not at the losing end of the stick on this. Okay. All right. So just some things that the outsourcers are going to manage. The eviction costs, the flat rate, eviction fees, and then also when you get into the hourly, they're going to take care of that stuff. You may have to float the cash for keys, but over the years, that's really transitioned into something where most outsourcers have a cash for keys department. You submit the paperwork on time. They're going to cut a check made out to the occupants. They're just going to mail it over to you, which is really the nicest way to go because then you don't have to submit for reimbursement. You can let them worry about that. Now, it's a really fine line on this, guys, because you definitely want the outsourcer to manage as many expenses as possible because it mitigates your exposure and your liability. But at the same time, you don't want to raise your hand every single time there's an expense and ask them to cover it because then you become a burden to them and you're not really their partner in the field taking care of things, okay? So they're going to cover those eviction costs, lockout expenses, like you may have to find a crew to go out to do the lockout if it's not covered in the flat fee for prop pres. Most likely it's not, but they may have somebody that they take care of and they pay directly. So this is all going to depend on the client you're working with, but flat fee property preservation services, 90% of the time the outsourcer is just going to take care of that, and then you would take care of any out of scope issues, right? As long as they're not like a huge expense. Title services are going to take care of that. Past due and annual taxes. I have seen some outsourcers that will not allow you to do anything with the taxes. They have a third-party company that gathers all the information. They cut huge checks. They pay them all at the same time. They do a reconciliation whenever the taxes are due, and they want you to stay away from it. Hey, that's fine. You don't want to be involved in the tax issues anyway. There are some things, though, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I have seen agents that have said, hey, I had to get this thing to closing. The tax bill was $4,500. I just went ahead and paid it. That's great. You might not be reimbursed for it. I hate to say that. I hated seeing this on the operations side. But the point is you never pay for an expense that wasn't approved prior to you making the payment unless you're willing to not be reimbursed for it. Okay? So by all means, if you don't want to be reimbursed for that $4,500, that's fine. Make that payment. Don't expect payment back. And that's a strategy that a lot of people will use, a lot of the good agents will use. They're not going to let a closing be held up for 2 weeks over a $125 fee. Okay, while they're waiting to see who's responsible for it. They're just going to pay it and they're going to move on, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So let me just pull the brakes, back up a little bit. So past due annual taxes, typically they'll take care of that. And then your closing services, most likely they're using a large vendor and they're going to take care of that themselves. Now, things that you're typically responsible for are going to include past due and ongoing property expenses. So you're looking at your utilities, your HOA dues, code violations, repairs, property maintenance. Now, it depends on the amount of these. Like, you can run into some HOA dues that are just astronomical. It's okay to ask for them to cut a check, for the outsourcer to cut a check, and we'll go into that a little bit. But the majority of times you're going to handle your utilities. They're always going to want to see the lights on. They're going to want, even if you always want the power on, even if you turn the breaker off, you want power on. You want the water service transferred. You want the gas on. Okay, and you've got to make sure that the HOA fees are being paid on time, that you're looking for code violations. Now, those code violations can get expensive. I've got an example in here. It's pretty outrageous, but it's also pretty typical. And then those repairs, right? Like, if you're doing $10,000 in repairs, nobody's expecting you to float that check. It's okay to request reimbursement for that, but also keep in mind that you're managing the asset. You may have to spend a little cash. So what I have pitched and what I have seen my peers pitch is a $2,500 per capital, a $2,500 per asset capital requirement. Okay, so what that means is that if you have $25,000 in cash or a combination of cash and credit cards, then you can handle 10 assets, right? If you want 100 assets, right, then I need to see $250,000, right? That's basically just how this works. Now, that's not saying that you're not going to spend $2,500 on every asset, because it may be a junker home that you don't even have utilities on. You haven't done anything to this. The prop pres has boarded it. They're taking care of the grass. Easy breezy. You're done. You're not spending any money on it. And you may have another high-end home that you've had to stroke a big old check to do carpet and paint and maybe some appliances, or to fix a roof or something like that. So it's not saying that you're going to spend $2,500 on every asset. It's saying that you need to have that availability. And I've seen this in play. I had a big broker, Rasmus Real Estate, out in Georgia, that was managing like 700 assets at one time for various people. And they were floating about $500,000 a month in reimbursements. Okay. Then I had another broker in that same area that was a big time broker managing 50 assets or so, definitely not the 700 that Rasmus was doing. But he was floating about $50,000 a month in reimbursements for his assets. And then I had a smaller broker that was floating about $5,000 a month for assets. And that's money that you just can't count as income, guys. Like, it's just going to come in, it's going to go out. You're just going to maintain the utilities. You're going to pay some bills with it. But it's basically, it's your operating account. Okay. So the asterisk there, small invoices are typically managed by the agent, but could still be paid by the outsourcer directly. Like I said, mitigate your liability and have them pay it, but also don't have them pay everything, or they're just going to stop working with you, right? So past due amounts, this is a big deal, and I think a lot of agents forget this. So I just want to drill this home for a minute. This is the exact same for the outsourcer. So there's nothing special. You're not getting any kind of special treatment on this. When an asset is received, you have a certain number of days to get the invoice, right, and pay the past due amount before you become liable for any past due amounts. That's because the outsourcers have the same thing. Okay, like VA sends an asset over to VRM, and they're basically saying, hey, you have 60 days to pay all the past due balances on this, whether that's HOA, past due HOA dues, past due water, which is one of the most typical things that we see, past due utilities, to cure the code violations, all the stuff. You have 60 days. And then anything that happens after that 60 days, you're going to eat, right? If there's a code violation on this house, after you've had the asset for 60 days, that's your responsibility. So they're just turning around and they're putting that on you as well. Okay. So outsourcers are going to be reimbursed for any past due expenses incurred before the asset was assigned, but there's going to be a ticking clock, and you've got to resolve them within a certain period of time, or else it's going to be on you. It's going to be on the outsourcer. Okay. Past due fees and fines incurred after the asset has been assigned may be non-reimbursable. And what I mean by this is, like, if you've brought, let's say the power's brought current, no problem, and then you've had the asset for 90 days and you submit for reimbursement and there is a late fee on there, they're not going to reimburse that because you should have been responsible and paid that on time. Okay. So not every past due fee or fine is reimbursable, right? If it's something that you intentionally did, or maybe not intentionally did, but something that happened because you weren't on top of your game, you're not going to be reimbursed for that. You're not going to be reimbursed for insufficient funds. You're not going to be reimbursed for interest payments like on a credit card, and you're not going to be reimbursed for late fees at all after that certain time. Like anything that incurred before you got it, sure, no problem. And the same thing goes for like if you incur like late fees incurred while you're waiting for the asset management company to approve something, right? That's pretty typical. If their accounting department is not running well, it may take a while to get word that you're being reimbursed or to get approval for your reimbursement. And then you, and that's fine. You're just going to make a note of that. That wanted reimbursement, but this happened, blah, blah, blah. It's fine as long as you're taking notes of it, okay? So after past due amounts have been brought current, like I said, you're responsible for keeping that account in good standing. So just be on top of it, guys. It's just like paying one of your bills. Late fees, insufficient funds, they're not going to be reimbursed. You're going to eat those. All right, this code violation. This is my boy Eddie down in Florida. Eddie is a fantastic agent. He does a ton of business. And this is just a Facebook post that he did. I love watching him do this stuff. And he did this all the time when I worked with him. Eddie took a $49,000 lien and reduced it to $165. Okay? Because, guys, REO assets, they just have a big old target on their back. And the cities see them, and they know that the bank's got deep pockets. Like, they're not going to come after me and say, hey, we just charged you $500 a day for the last 300 days. You owe us a ton of money. They're not going to come after me because they know that I'm just going to go bankrupt and say, hey, screw you guys, I can't pay this. But they know the Bank of America has deep pockets, and they can pay that because they won't be able to sell the property until they resolve that. And that's what you see really is these municipalities kind of taking advantage of the big banks. Now, Eddie is the kind of guy that won't roll over for that, and he has a very good process for going out and resolving code violations and liens and past due liens. And he does the same thing, not just with code violations, but you'll see it with HOA fees and fines. And he does a fantastic job for it. So what I have put here is really just the steps to negotiate past due amounts. Okay. Number one, guys, have a good attitude. You know that everything that we go through in this program is you've got to have that right attitude and go into it with a win-win. You're not walking in. This isn't court, right? You're not going in and you're going to go beat these guys up and walk out with a verdict. That's not going to happen. We're not going in and asking to pay zero. We're just asking to pay what is fair, okay? So first thing, have that win-win attitude. Understand the facts. You want to know when the debt was incurred, why it was incurred. You want to know when the seller took responsibility for the property. And I'm not just saying when it came through foreclosure, but like when did they become responsible for the property? If they took it and then had to go through redemption, and then after redemption we had an eviction, and we couldn't get into the property, when was the eviction resolved, right? Like when were we responsible when we could really actually do something about this, right? And then we want to understand why the debt wasn't previously resolved. So I'll take like a code violation. Let's say something is incurring a $100 a day fine. Well, nothing was done on it because the outsourcer or the bank didn't have the property. We didn't have the ability to go in and fix it because it was owner occupied. And once it was, we actually went in, we cured it. It won't happen again. How much are we really responsible for? Okay. We want to understand the statutes attached to the debt. There may be limitations on what they can charge or when they can charge it. Notifications that they have to prove that they sent over and where they sent them and certified mail and all that stuff. Like we want to have a partner, right? Like not a partner, but we want to have, we want to have good relationships with the people at the city and the municipalities that are charging these, but we're also not going to take any shit from anybody, right? If we have to lean on some statutes to say, hey, you can't charge this, that's what we're going to do. We're going to be knowledgeable and go in and we're going to get these things reduced, and we're only going to make sure the bank pays their fair share, okay? And then we also want to know the cost and the resources needed to cure the violation, because sometimes it's not a simple grass cut, right? Like sometimes maybe in New Jersey, the violation is you have a leaking oil drum, and now we've actually got to get out there and we've got to get environmental testing done, and we've got to get that thing out of there and treat the soil, and we're looking at a $60,000, $70,000 expense. Like that could be pretty significant. So not everything can be resolved right away. That's fine. We just need to know the cost and the resources needed to cure the violation so we can start making plans and arrangements with the municipalities, okay? And then we want to cure the violation if we can. If we can't, we want to make arrangements to cure it. That's one of the number one things. Like after they get done trying to hose the bank, they just want to make sure that the property is being maintained. Nobody likes an eyesore. Nobody likes the junk cars in the front yard. Nobody likes seeing a trashed property, right? Like they're an eyesore. So when you walk in and you're like, hey, look, we understand 100%. We are waiting until our eviction goes through. As soon as the eviction's done, I guarantee we're going to get somebody out there. We're going to cut the grass. We're going to change those broken windows. I'm going to make it look really nice. I'm going to sell it to a nice family. Like, that's what we're going to do. We're going to cure the violations. We're going to make arrangements to cure it. And then based on that, we're going to propose a fair settlement with all the facts, okay? So, like, if they're charging $100 a day and they've been charging that for 365 days, but we just barely got the asset and it's been 5 days, you're right. We didn't resolve it for that 5 days, $500, that's on us. It's been resolved now. Let's settle it for $500, okay? And that's what Eddie does, and that's what good agents do, is that they walk in and they're not saying, hey, just take this off the books completely. I mean, it happens. I've seen people go in and say, yeah, absolutely, we're going to take that down. It doesn't happen all the time, but, I mean, present the facts, make it a win-win, and resolve the issue, okay? Now, expense reimbursement. This is really just like a summary. So as an agent, you're going to pay for the service directly. You're going to submit the paid expense to the outsourcer. They're going to receive it. They're going to process it. And then if it's eligible for reimbursement, they're going to cut you a check, or what most of them are starting to move to is they're just going to do an ACH deposit directly into your account. Okay, pretty simple. So here are my 8 rules to getting reimbursed. All right. Number 1, only submit approved expenses. So when I talk about eating an expense, right, or when I say, hey, you may have to spend $25 for somebody to go out and cut the grass, you're not going to submit that for reimbursement. You may have the asset manager or somebody tell you, hey, I don't want you to pay that. Go ahead and submit for reimbursement, and I'm going to charge back the prop pres vendor because they should have done it. That happens quite a bit, but don't anticipate it. What you're submitting is only approved expenses. And in that scenario I just gave you, that has technically become an approved expense because now the outsourcer has said you shouldn't have had to pay that. Go ahead and submit it. I'm going to approve it, and I'm going to charge back the vendor. Okay? That happens quite a bit, no problem. But only submit approved expenses. And one thing that absolutely drives us crazy on the operations side is when agents just think that they can make decisions for you. And you'll find this. Like, it's great to have a good relationship with the asset manager, but at the end of the day, they're in charge. Okay? So if you go into a house and you're like, yeah, I felt like it needed a new door. Okay? I didn't like the door. People were complaining about the door. I went to Lowe's. I bought a steel door. It was $750. You need to reimburse me for $750. Well, the asset manager has, or, accounting or whoever, accounting is going to bring it to the asset manager and say, hey, is this expense approved because it's out of scope and I don't see approval notes. The asset manager is 100% within their rights to say, I didn't approve that. No, we don't reimburse it. Okay? So if you're making decisions without consulting with the asset manager, be prepared to eat those expenses. Don't submit those for reimbursement without an approval. Okay? That's like rule number 1. You only submit approved expenses. Okay? And then you've got to put them in on time. Okay? Don't get them down to... I understand you can't always avoid getting down to the wire, but as much as possible, give these people time to do their job, and don't dilly-dally. Don't dick around. Don't wait. When the expense is done and you've cut the check and you've got your proof of payment, submit it. Okay? Just submit it. Just put it in. There's no point waiting. Use the correct system or systems. It might be a combination of systems, right? That's fine. Master your systems, submit them the right way, and understand how to go in and check and verify that the information was received and all that stuff. So that's why I put this here. So I put use the correct system, submit complete and accurate documents and then verify the reimbursement was received and is complete. That doesn't always mean making a phone call or shooting an email. If you understand the system and you're using the correct system, you can actually go look for updates in the system that will show that the payment was, the reimbursement was received, that it's in processing, that it was approved, whatever the status is. And if you're not seeing that, then there's a very professional way to just reach out and say, hey, just wanted to verify you received my reimbursement that was submitted on this date. I know you're busy. Thanks so much for your time, blah, 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 right? So that's it. You're going to use the correct system to make sure it's going to the right person. You're going to only submit complete documents. So you're not going to just send in like a check. You're not going to say, hey, here's $180. This was utilities. You're going to send in the statement, the check, the canceled check, or a credit card statement showing that you paid it, that it already cleared your account, right? And then you're going to submit it with the right paperwork. On repair, you're going to take a before and after photo, even if it's something like a garbage disposal, right? Like, how do you get in and show a broken garbage disposal? Well, show me a picture of the old garbage disposal, maybe an exterior shot, and then take a shot down inside, and I can see that it's all rusted, and then take pictures of them putting in a new disposal. Take pictures of the side that show it's a new brand, and a picture down low showing that the blades haven't rusted yet, right? Like, take a picture for everything. Now, let's say you have to do a sump pump. Same thing. Anything that's going to be very hard like that, you're just going to take pictures, whatever you can, before and after. If it's a broken pipe or like an electrical repair, that's great. Take a picture while they're there. Okay? Take a picture of the electrician working on the outlet box. Fantastic. But submit complete and accurate documents, okay? And then follow up if the check isn't received on time, but understand what the timeline is, right? Like, a lot of these reimbursements are 60 to 90 days, guys. And that's why we say you've got to have this money earmarked and just count on it being a floating account. It shouldn't be something you're paying your mortgage with, because once they reimburse you, that money should go right back in to manage another asset or another expense, unless you're looking for a one and done. But if you're looking to make a career out of REOs and to be the number one player in your field, you've got to be ready to have a revolving account. Okay. So that's what's going to happen. You're going to get your reimbursement. You're going to know that it may take some time, and you're only going to escalate it, right? If it hasn't been received within those timelines and nobody's notified you. Okay. But number 7, one of my favorites, don't take any shit if you're right. Okay. Like, just because they're your client, you don't have to roll over on every single thing they do. And here's the example I give. I've run into scenarios where you have asset managers on a power trip and they approve expenses. So the number one thing you're going to do when that asset manager calls you and says, yeah, I don't care. I just want you to go out and pay this thing. Pay it right now. Fantastic. If you could just send me an email, that'd be great. Okay. They're going to send you an email. Hey, $5,000 for this repair, approved. Well, let's say the asset manager only has $100 approval authority. It doesn't matter. If an asset manager representing the outsourcer has sent you an approval and you have it in writing and it says, I approve you to go do this expense, you have approval from the company because they're representing them. And if that asset manager needs to be written up or disciplined or fired because they're making these approvals that are way beyond their scope of approval or authority, it doesn't matter. That's not on you. Your job is to do what they ask you to do, okay, and get it in writing. So if you're right, that's fine. You stick with your guns. You escalate that appropriately. It would go to a manager and you would say, hey, look, I don't know the inside workings. When an asset manager tells me this is what I need to do, I do what they ask me to do because you're my client. This is how it works with all my other clients. I've never had an asset manager approve an expense that was beyond their scope. Whatever it is, it's okay. Don't take any shit. Stick with your guns if you are right. If not, back away. I have seen people lose accounts over $25. A $25 expense that they felt like we needed to pay, they escalate it to me, and I say, no, we shouldn't have paid that. I get this $25, but the principle is you shouldn't have made that decision. If you're going to make that decision, you need to eat it. And I've seen people escalate all the way up for $25 when they were in the wrong, and we finally said, you know what, you're right. Give them their $25, never work with them again. Okay? So that kind of goes back to number 1, only submit approved expenses. But then don't take any shit if you're right. Okay? So Approved. You will only get reimbursed for approved expenses. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't try to help you out, right? Like if you are in that scenario where it's a year later and you're like, man, I totally forgot about this expense. You call me and I would say, well, yeah, I'm not going to approve it, but I'll submit it in and see if they can reimburse it for you. And there's nothing wrong. Like it's a win-win. Like we're not adversaries, right? Like we're not trying to, the accounting department is not our enemy, right? Their only concern is, will I get reimbursed from the seller? Will I get reimbursed from the bank? And if they will, then most likely they'll approve it for you. But they would have to escalate that to the client and say, hey, here's the scenario. The agent is submitting late. If we pay them, will we be reimbursed? Okay, and that's a big one that I learned. That's your verbiage, guys. If I pay this, will I be reimbursed? And you're not going to do that on every single thing, but when the asset manager is asking you to do things that are out of scope, or anybody, let's not just put this on the asset manager, but the closing coordinator is saying, hey, go pay those taxes. But you know that the strategy is to have a third party pay taxes. That's your email. If I pay these taxes in the amount of $4,300, will I be reimbursed? And when they send back and they say yes, that's your approval, right? Submit it. So some expense approvals are implied, right, through a service level agreement. Those are going to be your small things like maintaining utilities, select property preservation items. And you would actually see that in there. Like they may show your authority. The agent has authority to pay ongoing utilities not to exceed $250 per month or per expense, whatever. You're going to see that. So that's an implied approval that's going to be in your service level agreement. Everything else must be approved in writing by the outsourcer in order for you to be reimbursed, okay? There's nothing wrong with asking for that. That's just covering yourself. It's protecting your company. It's just good business, all right? And then, like I've said 100 times, if you decide to make a payment without prior approval, just be ready to eat that expense. And that's not always a bad thing. Like sometimes that has to happen. On the traditional side, I've eaten a ton of expenses. And because I work for myself, I'm the only one that's going to have to reimburse that. But because I did a poor job in one area and had to put a new water heater in a home, hey, that's me. I'm going to eat that because I need to maintain my reputation in the industry. Okay. So make sure they're on time. Expenses have a deadline. All right. And make sure you understand the deadlines and submit for reimbursement well before those deadlines. And those are going to vary from client to client. And that's why I just say, just don't mess around with it. When you have an expense, submit it. If you want to wait and do expenses weekly, no problem. Okay. Make sure you're still looking at it because a closed asset is when you have the tightest time frame. It's typically 30 to 60 days after an asset closes. So when that happens, you want to really be on top of it and get your final reconciliation submitted. But if you want to say, hey, let's just make a system. I know that on Mondays I go out and then I inspect all my properties. On Tuesdays, great, I submit for all my reimbursements. That's fine. I wouldn't go past 2 weeks. I wouldn't do it more than 2 weeks. But understand that there's deadlines. And if you miss those deadlines, then it's likely that you won't be reimbursed. And you've got to be prepared for that, okay? And then one thing to remember too, rejected reimbursements are still subject to deadlines. Okay, so if I have 60 days for my final reconciliation and I send an invoice in 30 days after closing and they reject it 15 days later, that's 45 days after closing. I still have 15 days to get that thing corrected and submitted and approved. Okay, so that's why I always say do it earlier. Don't wait. Correct system, just know and understand what system or systems you're using. Are they going to be online submissions? Some people will have you email it over to them. Some people will have a complete spreadsheet like like those old mileage reimbursements you ever did if you were out traveling as a salesman. And then upload photos, documents. Like just understand what the system is, what is needed from you to be considered a complete submission, a complete package. Typically, it's going to include a submission form, an invoice or a statement, the receipt or proof of payment, approval if it's not one of those implied or generic approvals, before and after photos like we talked about, and then when you're looking at repairs, lien release or liability waiver. If you're doing cash for keys, that would also be a release, right? And like we said, verify and follow up. Look for automatic verifications more than anything. And if not, follow up with the outsourcers to verify that they received the request and that it was complete. All right. And then follow up if the expense is not received after it's expected, but allow time. Like we said, it takes 30 to 90 days. So don't panic. They're not going to send it to you the very next day. It'd be awesome if they did, but don't expect that. And then I'm just going to go over this again. Don't take any shit, guys. Some outsourcers, and I have gone to battle with VPs of accounting because they will try and deny reimbursement. If they have a poor process in place, they're going to look to you and they're going to ask you to eat it. I have had one accounting executive say, well, we need to just ask all of our agents to do the initial rekey and just eat that expense. Like, are you kidding? We can't do that. There's no way you can do that. And it was this huge battle internally. They're looking for ways to save money, right? If they're getting a $1,000 flat for, or let's say a $2,000 flat for prop pres, $2,000 flat fee, and it's costing them $1,500, and they're only making $500. Well, if they can make you eat that initial rekey and save $75 across 1,000 assets, they're going to try to do that. Okay. If you're in the right, don't take any shit. Submit completed packages and just stand your ground, right? But like we said, submit a complete package for an approved expense through the right system. Do it on time. And that's it, right? Like if an individual at the outsourcer is inappropriately approve your expense, we've talked about this. It's not your problem. I read that wrong. I thought I couldn't have written it like that. Yeah, that's their problem. That's not yours, and that's okay. It's okay to be professional and say, no, you approve this. That's why I paid it. Okay. Anyway, that's why you always request written approval for anything that's not included in the SLA, or it doesn't always have to be in the SLA. It may be a task, like you may be tasked and it says pay this amount and it's got approval in the system. That's the same thing as written approval. Okay. And then we want to master the system. This is kind of redundant, but we're just going to drill this home because if you're not getting reimbursed, you're really not making any money because you're getting paid a commission, but you're spending a fortune managing this asset. So master the system, submit the invoices on time, submit the correct paperwork, verify it's been received, but do it properly. I mean, that's a pretty redundant slide. And then this is really tough, but I have been with outsourcers that have written off 30% of their expense reimbursements every month, and you're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars. Okay, they're going to look to pass it on to you if they can. We're just not going to let them. We're going to do everything right. We're going to submit it on time. We're going to submit approved expenses through the right system with the right documentation. No problem. So what happens if you do get rejected? Okay. Well, number one thing is to understand why they rejected it. Like, did you miss a document? Did you forget to put your proof of payment? Were you missing photos? Did you use the wrong system, the wrong category? What was it? Determine if you're able to resubmit. Support your request to reimburse it. And then again, escalate it if necessary, if you're in the right. Okay. If you're submitting the wrong stuff, and this is part of learning, guys. If you're submitting like the final utility bill and it's due within 60 days and it's rejected because you did it within 65, you can escalate that and ask somebody to make an exception, but you were in the wrong. You knew the rules. You didn't follow the rules. You may have to eat that expense and just take it as a learning experience. Tighten down your processes internally so that you're not running into that scenario. And then pick and choose your battles. Like, is it really worth going head to head with this company that can fire you and just find any number of replacements over $125? Like, maybe it is. Maybe it is to establish that you're in the right and that you're going to follow the rules and you expect them to follow the rules. But just pick and choose your battles wisely. The financial loss thing here is a concept that not very many agents get. But I know you are all going to get it because you're the best of the best. So you have to reframe your mindset. Okay. Managing your assets is a cost of doing business. It's just like your office, support staff, and other expenses. Okay. And I've pitched this over and over again. Like, you're not asking for them to reimburse you for your office, and you're making a decision every month about where to house your office. Now, some people are going to have a really nice storefront that's expensive and it's got a lot of foot traffic, and other people are working out of their house, right? Someone have a lot of assistants they're paying good money for, and some people are doing it all by themselves. That's how you set up your business. Well, managing your assets is the exact same. You could, by all means, choose to go out and just do your weekly inspections. And if the property is not being maintained, then your strategy is that you're going to simply escalate that. And that's fine. I'm not saying you have to take these losses. Like, you're going to take good photos, you're going to escalate it, you're going to document it. So if there's any code violations, you have really good ground to fight the outsourcer on when they try to kick that expense back to you, right? That's what you're going to do. What I would do, and what I've seen the most successful agents do, is be prepared to take a loss in certain situations. Like, number one, if you mess up, that's on you. Take a loss. If the service is needed to protect and preserve the property, and that comes back to your broker emergency kit, right? If I need to pay somebody $25 or $100, if I spend $100 on this asset to keep it maintained, that's no problem, right? I'm going to escalate that to my asset manager, let them know that I've spent a fortune maintaining this asset because the prop pres company they assigned me is doing a shitty job. And then a lot of times that asset manager is going to work with you and try to get that reimbursed, and then do a chargeback to that vendor, right? You could also use that to say, hey, let's say they send you out a prop pres company and you say, hey, I have eaten $500 this month on prop pres issues because these guys can't get back out. Please assign me another vendor. Doesn't mean you're going to keep taking the hit. Or you go to that vendor now and say, hey, guys, I keep taking a hit because you guys can't get out there and do your job on time, right? And you use it for leverage during those conversations. But if you need to protect or preserve the property, at the end of the day, it comes down to you and how you're managing your property. It's your storefront. It's your reputation, right? If your reputation is that every time we see your assets, they're just not maintained, yeah, you could point and you could say, hey, it's this prop pres company. Or you could say, hey, you know what? I'm going to bring somebody on staff that just cuts grass all day. They cut grass, they shovel snow, turn it into a business venture. I'll go to my other competitors. I know they're running into the same issues, and I'll say, hey, guys, I'll go cut your grass. Here's how much it will cost, right? I mean, you can do things like that, but protect your reputation, pass your client inspections, right? And then if something's needed to close. If I'm I don't want to use $500. That's not typical, but if I'm a $200 fee away from getting this thing closed and me getting paid, I'm going to make that, okay? I'm going to make that payment. And that's the idea. So you have to look at every asset as a fluctuating amount, and we've got to get our mind frame away from loss. Like, it's really easy to look at something and let's say 3% on 200,000. All right, I'm going to make 6,000. The minute you do that, 6,000 is locked into your head. So anything you make below 6, you're taking a loss. So if the check comes out, it's $5,000, you lost 1,000 because you had to pay all these things out. In your head, you're thinking that's a loss. I just lost $1,000. Well, if you reframe it and you say, I just made a $5,000 on this asset, that's great. That's how you should be looking at every asset. Now, there's nothing wrong with then going back and saying, okay, this year we have lost X amount of dollars. How do we improve that? How do we get more efficient? How do we keep more money in our pockets? That is a conversation you should have monthly, quarterly, annually, looking at these and fine-tuning your processes. But understand that it's a business and things are going to fluctuate, and you're going to make a different amount on each asset. So maybe on this asset, we're taking a hit and we're not making a ton of money, but we're preserving our reputation. We're protecting the asset, and it's going to lead to more listings down the road. That's going to make you a ton of money. All right. So I feel like I've beaten that to death a little bit. If you want to talk about it more offline, I would love to. I mean, that was really my soapbox for so many years, was saying, hey, take a hit. Don't expect the minimum on every single asset. Like, work your asset like a business. Take care of this, or I'll find somebody who will. Okay. And that's not meant to be mean. I'm not saying I expect you to lose money. I'm saying I expect you to protect my asset at all costs. And if you can do that, I'm going to reward you with more business, and I'm going to take care of your prop pres issue. Okay. And if that means chargebacks, hey, I have no loyalty to that prop pres company if they're not doing my job. I have a loyalty to you if you're taking care of my assets. Okay. So be prepared to float money on an ongoing basis. It's going to get big. Don't let it panic you unless you're not being reimbursed, and then take the appropriate steps like we looked at. Like, if they're not reimbursing, look to see if it's the right thing. Make sure your expenses are approved. Make sure they're submitted on time in the correct system with the right documentation. And then if you're not being reimbursed, if it's taking way too long, escalate that. That's totally okay. But make sure that you're in the right when you do it. And at the end of the day, guys, do what's right for the property. Okay. If you can't do what's right for the property, I'm not saying eat $1,000 in every single deal, but spend some money. You may have to spend some money. You're going to spend some money on marketing and supplies and ads and things like that. Take care of the property. That's your storefront, right? Turn it into a business opportunity to get more buyers and more sellers and improve the neighborhood and stand out on your scorecard and stand out on property inspections and look like a badass. Just do what's right for the property, okay? All right, so that is all I have for that. If you have any questions, let me know. If you want to go into it a little deeper, that's fantastic. So other than that, thanks for paying attention. I'll see you on the next module.